Hey everyone, this is Andrew Lawton, fellow with True North, here for another live edition of the True North Report. Thank you for tuning in wherever it is from which you are tuning in. It's been, I think, about a week and a half since I've done one of these. If you've been following us online, you know that I was traveling a little bit. We were at the Manning Center conference last week, had some other stuff to attend to this week. So if you can't tell, I have a little bit of a different backdrop than I usually do. I'm in a hotel room where there's like one conceivable corner that I can do this in, and it's like right here. And thankfully the bed is made, so if like the camera accidentally like goes over to the bed, it's not going to look too terrible. But I wanted to do it because there's a lot to talk about today. And I want to just make a point here that if the internet is not cooperating, let me know in the comments. Hotel Wi-Fi is always a little bit iffy. It seems like it's working fine right now, so maybe Marriott Hotels and I are having a good relationship right now. In any case, it's good to have you back tuning into this here. We'll have it on Facebook Live, on YouTube, and all over the place. And just so you know, I am recording this. I feel that the news this week makes it so that I need to be absolutely clear. I am recording this conversation. Michael Wernick, however, the former clerk of the Privy Council, did not know that his conversation with Jody Wilson-Raybould was being recorded not too long ago. And I've got to be perfectly candid with you, I don't care. I don't care. The fact is, even if the recording was a questionable or ethically questionable thing to do, I think it was the right thing to do because Jody Wilson-Raybould has proven that she is, in fact, a whistleblower. And this is a point that's been made by people left and right online, including Emmett McFarlane, a professor from, I believe, Laurier or Waterloo, who I don't normally agree with. But he's saying that anyone who's making this about whether Jody Wilson-Raybould should or shouldn't have recorded her phone call with Michael Wernick is missing the mark. She was exposing improper or potentially illegal conduct by the Prime Minister's office and by a number of people that are ultimately accountable to the Prime Minister's office. Michael Wernick, in this case, seems to be one of those, because this guy, who's supposed to be the most senior nonpartisan public servant in Canada, was, as I've talked about in the past, running political interference for the Liberals. So that's why this call is so interesting. It's 18 minutes long. I know it's boring to listen to Michael Wernick talk for even 18 seconds, let alone 18 minutes, but I do think you should listen to this call at some point and listen to the whole thing. You can read the transcript, but listen to the whole thing if you can, because what we see in this and hear from this is important for two primary reasons. Number one, it proves that everything Jody Wilson-Raybould has said in the past in her testimony towards the Justice Committee is true, that Michael Wernick and the Prime Minister's office were, in fact, putting pressure on her to take a particular decision in the SNC-Lavalin case. But it also shows that there's a fight going on. One of the things that I've pointed out in the past that I think is a very important point is that Justin Trudeau has changed his tack on this a few times. He's changed his tack on this a few times, from the one that everyone now makes fun of, it was all Scott Bryson's fault, to, we didn't pressure, and we didn't do this, and we didn't do that. All of the different iterations that the Prime Minister's office's responses have gone through are now at the point where there's no turning away from it. Now complete and utter ignorance is there. Because remember, at first they said no one did anything. No one did anything to Jody Wilson-Raybould. But now that we have audio of Michael Wernick undoubtedly putting pressure on her, the Prime Minister's office has had to give a statement that is basically pleading ignorance. This is what the Prime Minister's office said. We were unaware of the full contents of this recording before today. Unaware. Well, she told them. So that means that the Prime Minister's office didn't actually believe Jody Wilson-Raybould when she testified to these things. And you may remember when Michael Wernick was testifying, I mean, it seems like forever ago now, but when Michael Wernick was testifying, he made that joke, I don't know what I said exactly. I wasn't wearing a wire. Well, we know Jody Wilson-Raybould had what can best be described as a wire for that conversation. I'm not going to read the whole transcript for you, but I am going to pull out a couple of key excerpts here that I think speak to the fact that we are not dealing with a situation where there is a defensibility to what Wernick said. And when I pull this, the source of this particular transcript is from Global News. It starts with, some talk about phone tag, blah, 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 blah. it gets in. And then Wernick talks about the jobs element of it, the fact that 9,000 jobs could be lost if SNC-Lavalin decides to uproot from Canada and go somewhere else. He says, we want you to know that the deferred prosecution agreement tool is there. The Prime Minister wants it. We can get some advice for you from Beverly McLaughlin. But this is the line here. The Prime Minister wants to be able to say that he has tried everything he can within legitimate toolbox to try to head that off. He is quite determined, quite firm, wants to know why the DPA route, which Parliament provided for, is not being used. And I think he is going to find a way to get it done one way or another. So he is in that kind of mood, and I wanted you to be aware of that. And then he says, I don't know if he's going to call you, but maybe we're going to do it. But he says the Prime Minister is in a mood where he's going to get it done one way or another. That is not, this is your decision. We want you to have a few thoughts about it, talk to some people, think about it, consider it. That is pressure. That is political pressure. That is political interference. So this idea that we just wanted her to consider a second perspective does not square with he's going to get it done one way or another. And this is the conversation. Now, Michael Wernick has now become the fall guy for this. He resigned. But even in resignation, there wasn't an admission of wrongdoing. You may remember when Michael Wernick stepped down, he said that it was just because he didn't like that he was being bullied and he didn't like the way the opposition parties were talking about him and he didn't think anyone could ever trust him, not because of his conduct and actions, but they couldn't trust him because Andrew Scheer and Jagmeet Singh were saying mean things about him, basically. He said they've politicized the role of clerk of the Privy Council, when in actuality, this transcript proves that Michael Wernick politicized the role all on his own. It was Wernick who politicized this role, and ultimately Canada still hasn't fully come to terms with that yet because we only had the definitive ironclad proof of it when this phone call was published about, 18, 20 hours ago. Now, Trudeau has been basically tight-lipped on this. I haven't reached out to his office because they never respond to me, but they've said, we didn't know about it. It's a very terse one-line statement. The Privy Council office is not commenting any further. The Prime Minister's office, apart from that little statement, is not commenting any further. And when he says that, we'll give you some political cover by letting you consult with Beverly McLaughlin, the former Chief Justice, to prove that you're not doing anything inappropriate. Jody Wilson-Raybould says, I am 100% confident that I am doing nothing inappropriate. And then he said, no, but if you do this. There's even an admission, a tacit admission in this call that we know it would be inappropriate, hence we'll give you some political cover to do so, to make that decision. And we'll put it under the auspices of you just having a little chit-chat with the former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada. And she says prosecutorial independence is important. She says, I have said time and time again, it's entirely inappropriate and it is political appearance. She says even Beverly McLaughlin would agree this is political interference. She says, I've talked about this at the cabinet table with the Prime Minister. I've told everyone and I'm clear. And this is, I think, the very important part because, the whole point that Justin Trudeau tried to make, and again, one of those many statements was, well, did Jody Wilson-Raybould ever say there was a problem? Did she ever push back? And I want to read a line that Jody Wilson-Raybould actually shared with Michael Wernick here that's very important. And this is midway through, very early, I think in like the first 5 minutes of the phone call. She said, I'm going to issue my stern warning. I cannot act in a manner, and the prosecution cannot act in a manner that is not objective, that isn't independent. I cannot act in a partisan way, and I cannot be politically motivated. All of this screams of that. So I am actually uncomfortable having this conversation. So she tells him right there, I'm uncomfortable that we're even talking about this, that you're even telling me this. And she goes on to talk about all the different circumstances under which this would be wrong and why she's happy with how she's handling this. And this actually reinforces the reasoning that she gave in that committee meeting a few weeks back as well, that the reason she didn't feel the need to resign earlier is because she knew that when Trudeau was on a warpath here, remember the words from Michael Wernick, he's going to get it done one way or another. When she knows that Trudeau is on the warpath, it makes it a lot easier for her to say, if I stay in this position, if I remain Attorney General, I am not going to let political interference happen. So she honestly believed that her staying in that position was a safeguard of prosecutorial independence. And I think that's a really fascinating dilemma. So this woman actually was prepared to stay in a very uncomfortable and a very tense situation because she thought that was the only way that she could stand between Trudeau and his potentially illegal outcome of giving a special favor to SNC-Lavalin by giving this deferred prosecution agreement. And Wernick keeps saying, but no, but you have this tool, you have this tool. Yeah, part of having a tool in your toolbox is that you can prove that maybe you don't need to use that tool, or maybe you don't want to use that tool. You can actually say, I'm not going to use that. It's there, but it's not really just like, oh, a screwdriver, hammer, deferred prosecution. No, it's like that big red button on the wall with the glass case over it and the hammer next to the glass case, and you've got to smash it to get to it. It's that, yes, it's there. That doesn't mean it should be deployed with regularity just whenever it's convenient. It's there in worst case scenarios. And even then, it sounds like she didn't even want it to be there. It was only about a year ago that Parliament put that into effect, or a year before this phone call and this political pressure started here. And she talks about all the reasons that the actual independent prosecutor was not going through the DPA, reasons that she was committed to upholding. Wernick's pushing back on this because, remember, she would need to take over the prosecution from the Director of Public Prosecutions. That's a very key part of this. And there's another talk here. She says, I know I have a tool under the Prosecution Act that I can use. I do not believe that it is appropriate to use the tool in this case. And Wernick responds this about the Prime Minister. Okay, all right, that is clear. Well, he is in a very firm mood about this. So, and Jody Wilson-Raybould is pushing back. She says, does he not understand the gravity of this, what this could potentially be meaning? She says it's not about jobs, it's about interfering with one of our fundamental institutions. That's like breaching a constitutional principle of prosecutorial independence. And Wernick says, well, I don't think he sees it like that. And that's it. So there is, to give some defense to the Prime Minister's office, this whole differing opinion thing. I mean, the PMO just decides to claim this is not political interference. They decide to just pretend there is no interference component to this. But Wilson-Raybould was repeatedly making her objections known. And the clerk of the Privy Council, clearly not knowing he was being recorded, is pushing back on, no, we're going to get it done one way or another. And the implication in that is that if you don't do this, we will find someone who will. And they did. They did do that because they removed Jody Wilson-Raybould from her post as Attorney General and put in a guy. And it's only because all of this has been made public that I'm convinced this is probably not going to be a tool that's used, because it would look far too horrible now if someone in the government were to move on this. And again, I've talked about this in the past. I may have a great many political disagreements with Jody Wilson-Raybould, but she has made it. She has made it so that independence of the prosecutor can be upheld in this case. As Corey says on Facebook, Jody Wilson-Raybould did the right thing. Laura writes, this pretty much confirms the pressure. Why are the Liberals even still in Ottawa? Well, see, here's the thing, Laura. I don't think this pretty much confirms the pressure. I think this 100% undoubtedly, without equivocation, confirms the pressure. Because remember, when she testified before the Justice Committee a few weeks ago, and they wouldn't let her come back, but when she testified before the Justice Committee, it was in some respects a he said, she said. She was a credible witness, but she hadn't offered proof. This is proof. This is the smoking gun. And much like in the Lindsay Shepherd case, the only reason she's able to offer this proof is because she had the forethought to record something. And what's interesting is that people are using that to impeach her, basically. I want to read the Toronto Star's angle on this. So everyone else is saying, oh, this is going to be the end of Justin Trudeau. Toronto Star, Jody Wilson-Raybould's secret audio recording sparks ethics questions from legal community. And they talk about the legal ethics on the publication of this particular recording. And oh my goodness, lawyers aren't supposed to record calls with clients. And you know what, forget about solicitor-client privilege. This is something that's more serious. One lawyer, the Star reports, is potentially going to file a complaint with the Law Society of Ontario. Now, worth noting, Jody Wilson-Raybould isn't even from Ontario. The only reason she's a member of the Law Society of Ontario is because she's the Attorney General of Canada. So if I recall correctly, she needed to become a registrant in each of the bar societies across the country. But I mean, all of that's secondary to the point here. You know, I think she would fully accept the consequences of a slap on the wrist from the Law Society when what she is exposing with that recording is a much more significant piece of the puzzle here. Because yes, there may have been a decision that she had to make in recording that was questionably ethical or even questionably legal. But it's like running a stop sign to stop a murder. I mean, your lower crime is being committed for the protection of a much bigger issue. And that's, I think, the very important point to be acknowledged here. And I want to read some more comments on this. Sharon writes, I don't know how any diehard liberal can support corruption at the top of this party. This cuts to the very heart of our rule of law. Let's see. Eric writes, good afternoon, Andrew. Keep up the amazing work. Well, hello, Eric. Good afternoon to you. And Thomas says she's protecting the Law Society. No, don't worry about the Law Society. The point there is that the Law Society has a rule on the governing the behavior of lawyers, and one of them is that a lawyer cannot record a call with a client without the client's consent. And in this case, her client was the government of Canada. Now, it's entirely possible here, and I would argue that in this particular context, Michael Wernick was not her client. Michael Wernick was not talking as a representative of Her Majesty's Government of Canada. Michael Wernick was talking as an agent of Justin Trudeau. And I do think that is distinct, maybe not from a legal perspective, but from a moral perspective. I think that's relevant here. This was not a client calling up a lawyer for, hey, what do I do, counselor, about this parking ticket? This was a significant attempt by the clerk of the Privy Council, who's supposed to be nonpartisan, to inject a political motivation into Jody Wilson-Raybould's tenure and behavior as Attorney General. And first off, I don't see any way that she remains in the Liberal caucus now. Like, I do question her judgment on staying in the Liberal caucus and running as a Liberal. When you believe that your party is as rotten to the core as she must believe the Prime Minister's office is, how do you justify running in an election on Team Trudeau? Because even though it's her name on the ballot, our party system is one that very much means you're running for the betterment of your party's leader. So I don't see any way she stays in the Liberal caucus. Jane Philpott's in a bit of a different situation. I wouldn't put it past them to eject her from the party now, but she's proven she's in the power position now because she recorded this call. So now instead of just distancing himself from her, Trudeau has got to distance himself from Michael Wernick, whose virtues he was extolling just a few weeks ago as like being the great-grandfather of Canadian civil discourse. And now Wernick's been exposed, and Wernick is gone. He resigned, I remind you, because he was trying to pin it on like the opposition party, but he's resigned whether he knew why at the time or not. He's the fall guy on this now. And Trudeau may still skate. That's the most dangerous part of this. Megan writes, I'm the same way politically. Miss Wilson-Raybould and I may not agree, but in this case, she did the right thing by releasing the tapes to the public so we could hear for ourselves and see just how corrupt this Liberal government federally is. And given all the evidence, it does show clearly she was pressured. Keep up your great work. Well, thank you very much, Megan. Look, in this particular case, Jody Wilson-Raybould did all the work. She did all the work. She put the audio out. You can read it on our Facebook or listen to it on our Facebook page. But I do think the importance from this point on comes in the analysis of it, because now we're going to see a lot of underbussing, they call it, throwing people under the bus. Sheila Copps, who's been essentially functioning as a Liberal surrogate, the former Deputy Prime Minister, has basically been tweeting about how terrible JWR is. She previously called her a bitch on Twitter, or said, no, she said, I'm not calling her a bitch, but if the word fits. She was being incredibly crass about that for a former Minister of the Crown. And we saw further to that point, more doubling, tripling, quadrupling down from the Liberal Twitterati. People that are basically now just trying to throw JWR under the bus as just a woman scorned. And it's profoundly sexist the way the Liberals are treating her. Now, I'm not one of these SJW, hardcore radical feminist types that sees everything as an ism, sexism, racism, whatever. I'm not one of these people, but I can point out the hypocrisy. of it. And this is an element I've raised in the past, that even if I'm not one of these people that puts these social justice battles on the forefront, Justin Trudeau is. And it is completely and utterly hypocritical for Justin Trudeau to hold himself up as Captain Feminist while supporting a legion of people who are just simultaneously picking off these obnoxious and annoying women, or obnoxious to Justin Trudeau, from the Liberal coalition. Selina Caesar-Chavin, Jane Philpott, Jody Wilson-Raybould. Potentially after this, we'll see some more fractures forming. We just don't know. But the reason I put this to you is because this is now a silver bullet that proves Justin Trudeau either backed the wrong horse when he stood up for Michael Wernick, or himself was in the wrong. And I think it's probably a bit of both. But I don't think he realized or anticipated just how forceful the pressure from Wernick was on Trudeau's behalf. But either way, it shows a level of incompetence and malice on this. He was both responsible for giving a directive to Wernick to give to Jody Wilson-Raybould, and more importantly, he was responsible for Michael Wernick taking on a partisan role when he's supposed to be nonpartisan. Remember, his job is to keep the lights on. His job is to make sure that the government functions, the civil service functions, not to advance a political agenda. And Wernick clearly and unequivocally was being the surrogate for the Prime Minister in these phone calls. And thankfully, Jody Wilson-Raybould was able to hit the big red record button. Ketcha, I'm sorry, pardon the pronunciation, says if this happens before October, this might change the election results. It's kind of interesting here. Margaret writes, do you think she has more dirt to share if she can? To be honest, no. Now, I must admit I didn't see this particular part coming, because this was something she could have raised in her testimony. She was smart not to, but it shows there's a strategic element here. But I think this is it. I think this is the dump of documents. There might be some more about things that have happened in the last couple of months, about her resignation from cabinet, about conversations she's had with Trudeau. But I think as far as smoking guns, this is probably going to be it. But there may be something on the other side, conversations between Trudeau and Wernick that aren't recorded, but someone else could speak to. I mean, this is the type of thing that could cause other staffers to say, oh, okay, I didn't realize this was happening. This is a bridge too far for me. And especially if this whole underbussing of Jody Wilson-Raybould continues, there are going to be a lot of high-ranking Liberals that become very uncomfortable with what they're about to see. And remember, that hasn't even started yet. That's going to be in the next week and a bit that we start to see exactly how the government response to this unfolds. But their whole no comment thing is not at all going to hold. We have to wrap things up here, but I want to give a big thank you to all of you for tuning in. We'll have more on this in the days ahead. But again, like I said, breaking news this weekend. I wanted to give you a little bit of an update from my undisclosed Marriott location here. Marriott, by the way, did not sponsor, but I do have to thank them for their internet holding up, which I don't expect at hotels. Have a great week, everyone. This is Andrew Lawton for True North. Thank you, God bless, and good day, Canada.